Okay, hi, welcome to the second reading for this particular tutorial on how to answer the VCE argument question. And we're looking at the 2012 exam question, which was to do with the future of reading and Mrs. Eliot's speech. We've done the first reading where we've pulled out the sort of big picture stuff, the key points, the main contention, and sort of what the issue is, what the topic is, and so on and so on. We just sort of got some general ideas from that. Right, so the second reading we're going to do is to try and discern what are the key arguments through the speech, if there are any tones that we can see, or shifts of tone that we can see, and to think about the audience and perhaps the way the audience is being impacted or persuaded or positioned by what's been said in the speech. So let's go through again the reading. Okay, good morning, fellow book lovers is the first thing. Okay, what we can do is, highlight here, fellow book lovers. Okay, so it's an inclusive statement. So she is basically, associating herself with all of the book lovers. So that's kind of an audience positioning thing. Okay, I have always been. So first person, it's again something that makes it personal, makes it a connection to the audience, and establishes her authority on the subject. Someone who is enthusiastic about new technology. As a teenager, I was excited. So as a teenager, if we remember, there are some senior school students in the audience, so that one is related to the audience there. I was excited to learn about the massive change that hit the world when Gutenberg invented the first principle. Until then, books were extremely precious and rare objects. Okay, so we can possibly say that, saying that books were extremely precious and rare is an appeal to audience's nostalgia. And then if we look further down, I imagine children self-taught without the terrible burden of their great big textbooks. And I'm sure that in this case, maybe teachers, parents have some sympathy with remembering their children carrying big heavy bags to school. And I'm sure the children also remember carrying heavy books to school. So this sort of positions the audience to agree with Mrs. Eliot when she's explaining the virtues of electronic books. Okay, so those are sort of like the first few examples of audience positioning. If we look at, let's have a look now at some of the tones, for example. Okay, so the tone starts off, okay, good morning, fellow book lovers, is kind of a very warm and collegial beginning. I was someone who's enthusiastic about new technology. Someone who is enthusiastic about new technology. I was excited to learn about the massive change. I like change. So when electronics books arrived, I rushed out to buy an e-reading device. I thought making books easier to get, cheaper to own, more convenient to carry. It had to be a good thing. I wanted to be free of the expense that goes with the lifetime book, and I wanted effortless library buying. I imagined children. So if we think about the kind of language that's being used here in terms of tone, it's fairly upbeat, fairly enthusiastic in terms of the topic that's being discussed. So we've got some idea of what's going on with the tone. And then the last point we come to is sort of trying to pick out like what one of the arguments might be here. So, what we can say is that e-books had to be a good thing. If we think about these virtues of it, I mean, cheaper to own, more convenient, easier to get, and so on and so on. If there was effortless borrowing an effortless return. So I think that's sort of a good way to think of the first argument in this speech is the virtues of ebooks. Okay, so we've picked out a few things there for the tone, the audience, and the argument. Let's carry on with the rest of the speech. Okay, so if we carry on reading the speech, okay, let's have a look. Like many of you, I'm an enthusiastic reader. So, I mean, in terms of the audience here, again, Mrs. Elliot is being inclusive here, associating herself with the audience. Like many of you, I'm an enthusiastic reader and I see books as a doorway to other worlds, worlds that we actively create in our imaginations using someone else's words. My enthusiasm extends to ebooks. Okay, maybe we can mention there. My enthusiasm extends to ebooks. Some things about them are great. I love being able to change the brightness, settings, and the font size. It's fun to look up dictionary and it's exciting to know what is. So what is there to worry about? Okay, maybe we can think of that as possibly appealing to the audience, asking them to consider that particular question in isolation. Well, I do wonder about the video and animations that some books will contain. They might become a kind of substitute. Recently, I was showing a child all alone. Okay, a child all alone is an appeal to the audience there, the desire to protect a child, an innocent child, looking at a tablet device. At first I thought he was reading, but he wasn't. He was viewing, some was experiencing computers. So I don't find this exciting. Okay, so here, the first person, to me it's disturbing. Okay, so there again, sort of leading the audience to consider this idea of something being disturbing. A child passively consuming. Okay, so there we can think about how Mrs. Elliot is looking to position the audience and appeal to the audience with that kind of language. Okay, if we look at the tone, okay, I'm an enthusiastic reader. Again, there's some enthusiastic. I see books as a doorway to other worlds, worlds that we actually create in our imagination. Someone else's words. Some things about them are great. I love being able to change the brightness of the font size. It's fun to look up a dictionary or Wikipedia, and it's exciting. Okay, so quite a few language choices there which keep the tone very upbeat. So what's there to worry about? Well, we're going to mark that there because that is also, again, a tone change. What's there to worry about? That means we are going from being upbeat and positive and enthusiastic to something to worry about. I do wonder shows us how we shift the tonal change. At first, okay, I thought he was reading, but he wasn't. He was viewing some experiences. So, okay, I don't find this out. I find it disturbing. So I think we can also highlight the idea of disturbing as being a change in tone, already imagined and packed up conveniently. Portable form as empty and unwholesome as a packet of potato chips. Probably the best example of tone change there. And then the last point, they would be as dead as dinosaurs. Okay, so really the change in tone there through those. Okay, and then if we look at the argument that we were talking about, okay, we were positive on ebooks. I see books to other worlds we actually create, so that's something. My enthusiasm says some things about them. I love being able to change the brightness settings and the font size, to look up a dictionary or Wikipedia, so access to things, and to know what ebooks can break through the limitations. So those all support the sort of first argument that we've come up with, which is about the positive virtues of ebooks. And then if we think about this tonal shift, then it's basically coming into another argument. So a substitute for genuine reading. And the dinosaurs didn't spring to life in his imagination. They existed only in a high-speed wireless connection, without which they would be as dead as, well, dinosaurs. So this idea of viewing or experiences versus actual reading, and the fact that there's this idea that in the virtual world things can be as dead as dinosaurs. So there the argument has changed. So we're moving into a second argument there, which is the negatives of ebooks. Okay, let's carry on with the rest of the speech. Okay, so reading further down this speech, let's have a look just first, again, this idea of supporting the argument, the negative argument now in ebooks. Endless exposure to screens, spending hours and hours using ebooks at school on top of the time they already spend watching TV and playing cartoons, and would it then okay for them to take an ebook to bed? So this is the idea of spending too much time with exposure to screens. So that's the argument there. In terms of the audience, positioning the audience, probably we can think about these rhetorical questions. Do we really think it will be healthy for our kids on time, and the time they already spend watching TV or playing electronic games? And will we then think it's okay for them to take an ebook to bed? So my generation. So here, Mrs. Elliott is appealing to the audience's idea of protection of their kids. What's healthy and what's not healthy, and positioning ebooks as possibly being unhealthy. So those are the key points there. And then for the tone, probably I wonder. So if we talk about I wonder, and the idea is if something is healthy, those are sort of like the key tonal words, which is making the speech a lot more negative than it was at the start. Okay, let's carry on with the rest of the speech. Okay, so looking at the speech up here. Okay, that doesn't seem so silly now, so we can think about that. The tone there. One of the things I love most about reading is the magical way it allows us to see impossible things in our imagination, making the boring everyday world disappear completely for a while. But I was shocked to discover that some ebooks might disappear in a puff of smoke themselves. Publishers have in mind to update text every year. Sounds exciting, but it means you might not keep ebooks permanently. They'd vanish. Recalled by the publisher software. You couldn't sell them at the community second-hand bookstore, and when something went out of e-print, how would you ever find it again? No wonder there's a move by consumers to build huge to preserve ground. They fear the loss of knowledge, history, and culture itself, as the world is flooded with ebooks that are accessible only through special software and depends on the computer servers of the World Wide Web. If global cyber disaster struck, okay, the loss would be unthinkable. Okay, so in terms of the tone of the speech there, there's a lot more alarm, there's a lot more idea of fear that's built into this idea of ebooks and what they might spell for the future. Okay, in terms of the argument, okay, again, we're thinking about what the key argument here is here. It allows us to see possible methods of making boring evidence disappearing for a while, but I was shocked to discover that some ebooks might disappear. Sorry, that's the wrong one. I got the wrong disappear. Might disappear in a puff of smoke themselves. Publishers have in mind to update textbooks every year as knowledge changes. This sounds it, but it means you might not get to keep your textbooks permanently unless you paid every year. They'd vanish, recalled by the publisher and software. You couldn't sell them, so you couldn't do something. And when something went out of print, how would you ever find it again? So the argument there that there are negatives to do with ebooks, and especially come down here to think about global cyber disaster. Okay, and then the audience appeal. One of the things I love most about reading is the magical way it allows us to see impossible or unreal things in our imagination. So appealing to the audience's view of how reading is magical, making the boring everyday world disappear completely for a while. So a lifestyle thing. But I was shocked to see that some books might experience publishers have in mind to update textbooks every year. It's not a change. This sounds exciting, but okay, that sounds exciting, but so the but is positioning the audience there, unless. Okay, so it's a warning, a caveat. Unless you paid every year, they'd vanish. So you couldn't sell them at the community centre, and when something went out of print, how would you ever find it again? Okay, so there's some key words there which are giving you cause for concern. No wonder there's a move. Okay, so positioning the audience there to concerned book lovers to build huge warehouses to preserve bound books. So the appeal to audience to preserve the books. The world is flooded with ebooks. So this idea of ebooks taking over, being a revolution and flooding. Okay, so there are some of the key points for that part of the speech. Let's continue. Okay, and here the visual probably supports the key argument that books could vanish. I have a fear too that ebooks might increase the gap between rich and poor. Knowledge and education are a form of wealth. I hope expensive, energy-hungry e-reading devices don't become a new way of keeping some people ignorant. So I think this is the third argument, which is that ebooks then start to have an impact on a sort of broader social level rather than just the specific individual reading issues. So that could be the third argument that we see in this speech, the sort of impact, the social impact, the broader social and economic impact that ebooks might have. So then if we think about how the audience is being positioned, we're talking about knowledge and education. Expensive, energy-hungry e-reading devices. So that's appealing to the audience based on positioning ebooks as something which are expensive and energy-hungry, and also the idea that knowledge and education, which are key parts of society, might also be negatively affected. So those are sort of ways that the author, Mrs. Eliot, is positioning the audiences. And then in terms of tone, again, we have this particular line here. So I have a fear too. I hope. So sort of a hope for the future. Don't become a new way. Okay, so those kind of language terms there shape the tone of the speech. Okay, let's go to the last part of this speech. Okay, so in the last part of the speech, the author, Mrs. Eliot, makes a sort of anecdote of Harry Potter going on a long and unpleasant flight, etc., etc. So the key argument here, I think, is that it's this idea of lending and sharing that traditionally it goes on between people who love books versus ebooks, and that not being possible. So that is sort of the summary of, or the conclusion of the anecdote which Mrs. Eliot gives down here. In terms of audience positioning, perhaps I felt a bit like Harry Potter character myself, which is this idea of magic happening, this idea that a free book can appear from nowhere. Okay, so encouraging the audience to feel that magic and how good traditional books are. Now I'm starting to sound a bit like a dinosaur myself, aren't I? Okay, that's an isolated sentence too, and it's also picking up on the idea of a dinosaur which is extinct. So, you know, Mrs. Elliot is sort of pointing to the idea there that traditional books might go extinct like the dinosaurs. Okay, and then in the conclusion, all of us who care about reading is appealing to the audience there. You young people as future leaders, direct appeal to those in the audience. Okay, and then the tone, we must all do what we can as this revolution rolls over us to make sure that important things are not entirely swept away. So some of the language choice there keeps the tone of alarm and fear very much at the front of the speech there. Okay, so that is the second reading, and through that we've been able to pull out the key parts which we think might tell us about the tone, tell us about the audience and how they're trying to be positioned or influenced, and the key arguments that we've seen through this speech. So I hope that's been helpful, and let's come back to do the third reading in the next tutorial. Thanks very much.